Hello and good afternoon once again. Today we are having the second session of the discussion that we started yesterday on rocks. Yesterday we were able to go through quite a lot, and I gave you some assignments to try your hands on. Some of you were able to do so, but others are unable to do that. So let me quickly go through the assignments that I gave to you so that we know we have done our best possible, and the person who is qualified to take the bundle, I would announce the person also so that we pick it up from there. So the first question is for you to tabulate two differences between igneous rock and the metamorphic rock. Two differences between igneous rock and the metamorphic rock. Now, this particular question is a very simple one. It's just for you to compare and contrast the characteristics that exist between the igneous rocks and then the metamorphic rock. It is for you to just put them in a table form. So if your answer is not in a table form, then you are losing marks, actually. So your answer should be in a table form, and that will earn you the full mark. So that's the first one. And the second one, let's take a look at the characteristics of the igneous rocks. We said that they are dark and shiny in appearance. They are dark and shiny in appearance. Now, before you even answer the differences, you should actually know what the metamorphic rock is. Last time we mentioned that metamorphic rocks are formed from either igneous rocks or the sedimentary rocks, which have been subjected to a high temperature and then pressure. And this is what brings about the formation of the metamorphic rock. So if you are tabulating the difference that exists between them, metamorphic rocks will be rough. Somebody mentioned that it will be rough, but in the case of the igneous rocks, they would not be rough. Igneous rocks will not be rough. So the person got it right. Then in terms of the crystalline nature, igneous rocks will be crystalline in nature. But in the case of the metamorphic rocks, they may be crystalline depending on the type of rock from which they are formed from. Mind you, metamorphic is from the term metamorphosis, which is change. All right. So they would either be um, hard or soft. That is another difference. Igneous rocks will be hard, but the metamorphic rocks will either be hard or soft. Now, igneous rocks they do not occur in layers. They do not occur in layers at all. Then in the case of the metamorphic rocks, they may be formed, or they may form some layers. That is if they are formed from the sedimentary rocks. And the last but not the least is the resistivity to erosion. Igneous rocks are resistant to erosion because of the nature in which they are hardy. They are very hardy. They are very resistant to erosion. But in the case of the metamorphic rocks, they are not resistant. They are either resistant or not to erosion, depending on the parent material from which they are formed from. All right. So that is it about the differences. Let me quickly project that for you so that you'll be able to understand exactly what I mean. Looking at the characteristics of the igneous rocks, you are just trying to compare and contrast. So metamorphic rocks, they are not dark and shiny in appearance. But in the case of the igneous rocks, they are dark and shiny in appearance. The igneous rocks, are crystalline. They have a crystalline structure, but metamorphic rocks do not have. They may have a crystalline structure. Sorry. Then, whilst the igneous rocks are hard, that is no two ways about it. The metamorphic rocks would either be hard or soft. So when you look at everything that we are talking about, you are just trying to say that the metamorphic rocks will have the characteristics that are intermediate between the igneous rocks and then the sedimentary rock. All right. Thank you for going through that. All right. So let's take the second question. The second question says, state three agricultural importance of rocks. Three agricultural importance of rock. It is very important to know that all the importance that we have mentioned, not all of them are actually of agricultural importance. And the reason why we are studying this particular topic is because we want to find out the relevance of this particular rock and its formation, as well as its composition and then disintegration. How relevant it would be to the human life, the human life. So we mentioned that as part of the importance, the rocks will result to the formation of a soil. So this is the most important aspect that in relation to agriculture. If the rocks result in the formation of a soil, then agriculturist, a farmer, will be able to cultivate his or her plant on such a soil. So this is one. Two, it serves as a source of soil minerals for plants. So this is also of an agricultural importance. Then three, for the manufacture of indigenous farm implements. For the manufacture of indigenous plants, for the indigenous farm implements. So I mentioned to you that yesterday that in the olden days, our forefathers are not actually exposed to technology, so they have their own um, technology, a means by which they should be able to cultivate the land. So they found the rock, especially the igneous rocks, to be useful in being used as a farm implement. So at least these three would do when you write. Let's take a look at the fourth one. Serve as a source of minerals, but this one is not in relation to agriculture. The next one, the construction of roads, and then yeah, on in the long term, we would say that they are useful, like because if you construct roads and then the building of the farm sheds, etc., using um, the rock, they are of a long term importance because when you finish cultivating your land, your plants able to grow, you harvest. Are you not going to transport them to the market centers for sales? Yes, so would say that that's also of an agricultural importance. However, the rest are not in relation to agriculture. So if you write for soil formation, you are correct. Two, as a source of minerals for plants, as a source of minerals for plants, you are also correct. If you write for the manufacture of um, indigenous farm implements, you are also correct. And if you write, it serves as it is used for the construction of roads and then bauxite that are of agricultural importance, you are also correct. All right, thank you very much. So let me see those who have scored. Let me see, let me go through. I'm going to read what everybody has written, starting from Bridget. Bridget says that the difference between igneous rocks and the metamorphic, they have a crystalline structure, but in the case of the metamorphic, they may not form crystals, and that is correct. Then the second difference is they are dark and shiny in appearance, but in the case of the metamorphic, they may contain. Yeah, Bridget, in fact, you cannot write this. The second comparison is you are not making the comparison. I expect you to write if the igneous rocks are dark and shiny in appearance. Metamorphic rocks are not dark and shiny in appearance, or they may not be dark and shiny in appearance. But I cannot write igneous rocks being dark in appearance and shiny, and then metamorphic rocks are they contain fossils. How? It is not possible. It is not possible for you to do that comparison. So that is wrong. Then for the importance of the agricultural importance of rocks, you mentioned for soil formation, used for building and construction, then for tourist attraction. I will take the first two, but the last one, I will not accept it. So in all, you have scored 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5. Then I'll take, in fact, I'm yet to know your name, but your number is 0248725463. You mentioned that igneous rocks, they are dark and shiny in appearance. Then in the case of the metamorphic rocks, they are rough in texture. No. You are, in fact, the characteristics that you have stated are correct and they are respective of the rocks. But you are making a comparison between igneous rocks and metamorphic rocks. So it is not possible for you to do that comparison. So that is wrong. Then igneous rocks are very hard. Metamorphic rocks, you said they are either hard or soft. So that is correct. Let's take a look at number 2. Three importance of rocks that are of agricultural use. 1, for soil formation, that's correct. For the construction of roads and buildings, that's correct. Tourist attraction, you are wrong. So you know you have scored 3 out of 5. 3 out of 5. Let me take the third one. This one, Princess. Princess. Princess Sarah. Sarah says that igneous rocks are very hard, are heavy, hard, and shiny. But in the case of metamorphic rocks, they are massive and hard. I don't understand what you mean by this comparison. So that's wrong. Then they contain crystalline. They are crystalline. In the case of metamorphic, you said that they are very dense. In fact, please, if you are making comparisons, you should be specific. You should not just state what you feel like stating. Yeah, very important. You need to take note of that. Now let's take a look at the 2 points you've written are wrong. Sarah, sorry, they are wrong. Then the agricultural importance of rocks, source of plant nutrient, that's correct. As ornaments, ornaments in agriculture, ornaments. Are the farmers going to put on the beads made of rocks to the farm? No, please. They would not actually do that. Okay, so let's take a look at. So it's also said for domestic uses, like you've not stated that, so that is wrong. And sources of food. Yeah, I would take that for you, source of food, but on a higher level, yes, I'll accept it. But at your level, just understand that it is not, you cannot use the stones as a food. I don't know what you mean by that though, but rocks being used as a food, to a larger extent, yes, but in specific terms, I would say no. So you have scored just 1 out of 5. Sarah, I hope you followed what we treated. I hope we followed what we treated. Okay, so I also saw one from MFA. MFA, I think you have copied from someone. Either you have copied, either you are the one who copied, or I don't even know how I should put it. Either you copied from someone or someone copied from you. MFA, the one that belongs to you. I don't know which one is applicable to you, but what you have written is similar to that posted by the number 0248725463. Please identify yourself. I would like to know you in person by your name. Thank you very much. All right, so we move on to today's discussion. We take the topic weathering, and this would be the concluding part of our lesson. So, weathering is what we are going to look at as our next subtopic under rocks. So, as rightly mentioned, this is one of our objectives and then we need to achieve. So, what is weathering? This is basically referring to the breakdown of rocks into simpler form by chemical, physical, or biological processes. All that we are trying to say is that the mass of the rock is being reduced from its state as a rock, but in this case, into a very simpler form. Somebody may say that the end product of the weathering process is the formation of soils. That is why we mentioned earlier that soil, the rocks are of biological importance because they are of agricultural importance because they result in the formation of soils. The process of rock weathering to a larger extent results to the formation of rock, as I rightly mentioned. So when you take a look at the illustration, you can see that this is the rock which exists in its nature. If it is being subjected to some environmental factors or biological factors or physical factors, then we expect that this particular rock would receive some cracks within it. And if the crack deepens, then there will be a splitting or a separation of the rock into fragments. We refer to them as fragments. Because in our definition we mentioned that the breakdown of the rocks would actually occur because of three different um, phenomenon, which is the chemical, physical, and then the biological. We would have three different types of weathering. So let's take a look at the physical or mechanical weathering. This is a weathering process involving temperature, wind, and water, where the chemical composition of the weathered rock or soil remains intact. Bear in mind, the chemical composition of the resultant rock fragments or the soil that is formed as a result of the weathering, chemical component remains unchanged. It does not change. But how does this occur? We said that the environmental factors would influence this, like temperature, the wind, and then water. They would influence this particular breakdown of rocks. Let's look at the agents that are responsible for this type of weathering. Temperature. The changes in temperature result to uneven expansion of the rocks, and the rocks therefore crack into smaller fragments. Let's dwell a bit on temperature, the changes. When there is an increase in temperature, we expect that there will be expansion. So when expansion takes place, we know rocks will not be able to contract again. If they expand, contraction becomes a little difficult for them. So by means of expansion, if there's a change in the temperature, like cold, we expect them to contract. And if they are unable to contract, then it means that it will result to the separation of the individual bonds, the bonds that hold the various particles of the rock together. So that will result to fragmentation or breakages, which we are referring to as the weathering. Winds. These are air masses that carry rock particles which collide with each other for weathering to take place. So wind is able to move, especially at a slopy ground. If the landform is very slopy, then what would happen if the land is very slopy? The wind will be able to carry or move the rocks from the upper level, the steepy level, to the ground level. So on doing the movement, it hits against the adjacent rocks, and the impact of this particular collision would now result to what we're referring to as the process of weathering caused by wind. Take a look at the third one, is the rainfall. The concept of the rainfall, we said that the rainfall water exposes the unweathered part of the rock to other agents of weathering. It also carries along rocks that collide with each other to promote cracks. Water also weakens the rock minerals to make them prone to the chemical weathering. When you take a look at this critically, just as the concept has occurred in the case of the wind, rainfall would also play a particular the same role when it comes to collision. So erosion is taking place. The rocks are being taken from one point to another, and by so doing, it will result to collision and then the breakdown of the rocks as well. So that is it. These three agents, take note, these three agents would not result to the chemical, would not result to the change in the chemical composition of the resultant materials that will be formed as a result of weathering. So you take note of this. That has to do with the physical or mechanical weathering. If you are asked to differentiate between this particular one and the next one that we are going to look at, take note of the fact that the chemical composition should be something you need to compare. All right. So we move on to the next. The next one is the biological weathering. Biological weathering. Now, for the biological weathering of rocks, this involves the actions of biological agents such as water. Sorry, this involves the actions of biological agents such as man, growth of plant roots, and then the soil living organisms that influence the breakdown of rocks into simpler particles. So when we say biological, we are just referring to living things, things that have life in them, or organisms that are able to carry out the seven life processes. So man should be able to result, if man is carrying is working on the particular rock for a long time, it will be an impact. There will be an impact, and that is one of the examples. Let's take a look at some of these activities. Mining and construction activities. These are activities by man that results to the breakdown of rocks. Mining and construction using heavy duty vehicles, etc., will result to the breakdown of rocks. Growth and penetration of plant roots into rocks. So if the roots are elongating, if the plant roots are elongating and they happen to meet an obstruction, which is actually the rock, they try their best possible to find their way through the rock. And if there is the slightest space for them to penetrate through, we expect that they will deepen the walls of that particular rock, which will result to the breakdown of the rock. And the burrowing activities of soil organisms, like like the grass cutter, will also result to the breakdown of the rocks. So that is about the biological method of rock, the biological weathering process. At this juncture, I would like you to take a critical look at these two, and you could also tell me the differences that would exist between biological weathering process and that of the physical or the mechanical weathering process. In both cases, the similarity between them, biological and then the physical, the chemical composition of the resultant material of the weathering remains intact. They do not change. However, bear in mind that biological process would actually occur as a result of the activities of biological agents or organisms that have life in them. But for the physical, they do not uh, take place as a result of biological agents. So take note of this. So we take a look at the third one, and that is the chemical weathering. This is the breakdown of rocks by chemical process resulting to the alteration of the chemical composition of the fragments. Fragments is the resultant material that is formed when the rocks are broken down. So we are saying that the chemical composition is entirely changed or altered. Let's take a look at how these processes would take place. First one is hydration. This is the rapid attachment of water to the rock minerals. Rapid attachment of water to the rock minerals. So if you continue to pour water on rock for a long time, we expect that the water molecule would attach itself to the minerals of the rock and a new substance is formed. So we expect it to break the rock down. So that's an example of how it is written. We have um, the water attaching itself onto the minerals of the rock. So that is it about the hydration. We have hydrolysis. This is where the rock minerals will react with the water. Rock minerals reacting with the water. Then we have oxidation. There is a reaction or a combination of the atmospheric oxygen with that of the rock minerals. There is a reaction or a combination of the atmospheric oxygen to the rock with the rock minerals. Mind you, oxidation basically means addition of oxygen to something. So if you are adding oxygen to the minerals, the minerals of the rock, then what is happening is oxidation. Because new substance is formed, which is not as the original, that is a recipe for the rock fragmentation. So you have seen another example over there where iron oxide, there is a combination between iron oxide and oxygen, and what is formed is a ferric oxide. Let's take a look at the fourth one, that is reduction. Reduction is just sharply opposite to that of oxidation. This is a removal of oxygen or the addition of hydrogen to the rock. So if you are adding hydrogen, we call it reduction. And if you are removing oxygen, we also call it reduction. Then we have carbonation. This is where a carbonic acid reacts with the rock minerals. Carbonic acid reacting with the rock minerals. That results in the formation of a new substance known as a soluble calcium bicarbonate. So carbonic acid reacting with a calcite, which is a composition of the rock minerals, resulting to the formation of soluble calcium bicarbonate. Then the last is solution. Solution. This is where water, which is a weak solvent, dissolves the minerals. Water, which is a weak solvent. Yeah, so I'll be asking you to give me the difference between oxidation and reduction as a process of chemical weathering, and also the difference between the process of solution and hydration. Solution and hydration. I can also ask you to differentiate between hydration and then hydrolysis. They all have their various differences. So typical example is the carbon dioxide reacting with water, and carbonic acid is formed in the process of rock weathering. All right, so this is where we drop the curtains on the various forms of weathering. Let's take our first exercise. Try hands on the following exercises. 1. Differentiate between biological and chemical weathering of rocks. Differentiate between biological weathering and chemical weathering of rocks. I know this will be a cool job for you. Then tabulate 3 differences between igneous rocks and sedimentary rocks. Tabulate 3 differences between igneous rocks and sedimentary rocks. Number 3. Briefly explain how igneous rocks are formed. Briefly explain how igneous rocks are formed. 4. State 4 importance of rocks in agriculture. 4 importance of rocks in agriculture. Number 5. State 5 chemical processes that result to weathering of rocks. State 5 chemical processes that result to weathering of rocks. Number 6. Explain how the plant can bring about the weathering of rocks. Explain how the plant can bring about the weathering of rocks. Number 7. Explain the relationship between igneous rocks and sedimentary rocks. The relationship between igneous rocks and sedimentary rocks. Then we take a look at the exercise 2. All these questions are just sample questions for you to try your hands on. And if you have any challenge with them, kindly draw my attention to the challenge that you have, and that will be addressed. So let's take a look at the sample questions, exercise number 2. Study the illustrations carefully. You have A, B, and then C. I hope you've done the studies very well. Number 1, identify the type of weathering taking place in the illustration A, B, and C. What type of weathering process do you think or do you suggest is taking place in diagram A? What was B and then C? Number 2, mention any 2 conditions in each case that resulted to the above type of weathering. So you have A, B, C. Mention 2 conditions that would necessitate the weathering according to the illustration A, B, and then C. Well, let's take the last set of the question, and that is supposed to be true or false. Supposed to be true or false, but I could not fine tune it. So let me just read it for you. Exercise 3. Differentiate between biological and chemical processes. Now, I think I mentioned this already. So all right. So this is where we drop the curtains, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a nice session, and this is how most of our sessions are going to be. In our next presentation, we are going to take a look at cells or biological cells. We'll be delving with the topic biological cells. We know that when you mention cells, 2 things come to mind. Either a cell which is used for electricity, to generate electricity, or a cell which is the basic structural and then functional unit of an organism. So we're going to look at the biological cells, and these are actually basic that we need to take a look at. Please, per the questions that I have given to you, try your hands on them as much as you could. If you have any challenge, you draw my attention to it. Because if I should give you an exercise and you fail to comply or do it as I expect you to, then you be in my red books. Okay, thank you so much for being with me in this particular session. It's a bye for now.